Hello and welcome to Survive, Restart, and Prosper, reimagining work in a pandemic. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I am very pleased to be joined today by our special guest, Richard Marshall, formerly of Gartner Research. Today, Richard is going to be putting on a presentation on how to reimagine work, as you can imagine. We're also here to take questions if you like. There is a questions box that you can type your questions to in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll have time for questions to interrupt in the middle. We'll also do some at the end. So go ahead, don't be shy. Go ahead and type them in. But anyway, let's get started. Hello, Richard. I see that you're there.
Hello, David. Thank you very much. So yes, we live in difficult times, and as someone who's been working from home for so long, I can't actually remember when I was previously working in an office. It's been an interesting time because I've been in the fortunate position that I haven't had a lot of change in the work I've been doing because I've been working from home, as I say, for as long as I can remember. And it's now, for me, it now feels very strange to go into an office. So I've had some insights from there, and I was thinking about all of the people who've been thrown into that change suddenly, and what does it mean, what it's like. And I started to look into how do we manage that process and creating a framework to help us get through that and to optimize our business. And
Richard, I don't know if you can hear me, but it seems like the sound may have dropped out, although maybe that's just for me.
Yeah, that was, okay. Sorry about that. That was finger trouble on my end.
Okay, fair enough.
Was in the wrong window. I'm not used to using GoToMeeting anymore. So I'm going to start with a quote from the Threepenny Opera by Bertolt Brecht, where he's saying, first food, then morals. But actually in the original German, what he's saying is feeding, as in animal feeding. It doesn't mean quite the same thing in German. So I was looking at how do we build a framework? How do we help people understand what it is that they're going through as companies going through? How do we create this navigation for them? And it dawned on me that, in fact, that you have to make sure that people can eat first and then start worrying about the more difficult things, as it were. So thinking of that as a structure, I was then looking.
Uh-oh, I think you've done it again with the audio.
Yes, let's try that. Right, okay, the focus is now in the right window. I'm not going to, hopefully not going to end up.
We have a whole hour to get this right. Don't worry, we'll be all set.
So I was looking at research around people who have looked into working in complex situations. And apart from anything else, I discovered that the expression, may you live in interesting times, is not a traditional Chinese curse, as many people claim. It was tracked back to a newspaper quote in 1936 and no previously, and that was by British Prime Minister Chamberlain in the lead up to the Second World War. But anyway, we do live in interesting times. And looking at it, back in the 80s, the military started looking at how do we manage uncertainty, because obviously if you're in a military campaign, there's the famous expression that no plan survives contact with the enemy. You have to be able to understand what is possible, what might happen. And they came up with this framework, which is called VUCA, the Volatility, Uncertainty, Complexity, and Ambiguity Index. So in fact, you get these VUCA indexes for different countries and for the planet. And as you can imagine, these are probably through the roof at the moment. They're probably at the highest they've been for a very, very long time. So these are useful things to think about, and most of us are not used to dealing with this kind of stuff, and we're being forced into that. We need to understand this framework, so this is a good thing to start with. And certainly the situation is very volatile. It's very unusual for us not to know what is going to be happening next week for most of us. Uncertainty, there's massive economic uncertainty, there's logistical uncertainty. We don't know when things are going to be unlocked. It's a very, very complex system that we're looking at, and that's something that I think a lot of people are not familiar with. The sheer complexity of the number of interactions. And an interesting example that we have here is that people are not allowed to drive out into the countryside just for amusement. And the reason for that is If they break down, it means that the emergency services and car rescue people have to come out and look after them, which is distracting them from medical duties in the case if there's an accident. But it also means that you may be transmitting the virus to people. So it's a very, very complicated situation, and that creates a lot of ambiguity for businesses and personal experience. So I'm going to try and look at that and see what we can come up with a framework, as I say, of how we're going to go forwards. But this puts us into a framework, again, that was created in 1997 by these three people, so led by Hugh Courtney. It's published research in HBR. And there are 4 levels of uncertainty. There's clear enough future, that's most of us live in that. Then there's alternative futures, which could be called scenario planning. Most organizations of a size will have somebody looking at possible scenarios of what might happen in the future. And they may come out with a variety of different plans. But at the moment, we are up at level 4. And not only that, but we have gone bang all the way up from level 1 to level 4 without going through the intermediate levels. Now, that is a massive shock to any organization. Now, a lot of people react by that to try and shut down, close down, and hunker down, I guess, is the expression people are using most. I think it's very important for us to keep our heads up. And that's really the theme for this presentation is, how should we think during this hunker down time? How do we manage the process as we go through this? So the first question, of course, is how do we survive? How do we as individuals survive? How do our businesses survive? How do we keep our colleagues and families alive during this time? Survive for business is obviously different from survive from a family, but it's still a useful way of looking at it. How do I make my business still be here when we come out of the pandemic, whenever that may be? Then how do we restart when everything comes back to something that resembles what used to be normal? How do we restart? And I use the word restart quite deliberately. It's not recover. It's not go back to normal. It's about restarting in the same sense of restarting a computer. We do that because we want to clear out old stuff. We want to get things starting and running better, doing things in a better way. So restart your business is really important. And that's what I mean by eyes up. We need to be not just thinking about how do we keep alive, keep going through the current situation. We need to think about how do we manage to have something that will restart. And not only that, how do we go on and prosper? How do we make ourselves thrive in this difficult time going forwards? And this, for me, is really key because there's huge opportunity here. It's a chance for us to rethink a lot of things. It's a chance to get a lot of stuff better, but it's a complicated situation. So taking all that, I want to put together many topics, but I had to stick to 4 because I didn't think you'd want to be here all day. So the 4 topics I'm going to talk through are work, the changes to work, which is perhaps the most obvious, digital transformation, that ever popular project, events, because that is what really kicked off the whole debate. If you look back, it was the cancellation of Mobile World Congress in Barcelona back in February that really kicked off this change. And it was cancelled because the big vendors were starting to pull out. And then, of course, all the events have been cancelled since. And finally, last but definitely not least, I want to talk about managing people and what to do with your people, teams, employees, as we go through this and go beyond it. So taking that 3-stage phase, I'm going to look at these things independently. So work is clearly a very important aspect, but most offices are sitting there empty. And as I said at the beginning, I've been working from home for a long time, so I'm quite used to working from home. And this got me thinking about the whole nature of how did we end up working in offices? Because if we go back several hundred years, we find that it's really the Industrial Revolution took us off the land. We all used to either work in a farm or work in our homes. And it's really interesting that we now think of working in an office or a factory as a norm, whereas 200 years ago, 300 years ago, people were all working from home or in your forge, which would be attached to the back of your house. So it was really only the move into the industrial era where we started moving people into an office and we started creating different work environments, and a lot of that was driven by equipment. So you couldn't have been a typist when you were at home because you didn't have a typewriter because they were big and expensive and heavy, and you wouldn't be near the person you were typing for. So we created typing pools and open plan offices and all that kind of stuff. So none of this is actually terribly new in the history of humankind. So This is probably at the beginning of last century, and you can see where people are in because they have to be there. And we're not there anymore. We're in a different place where people can work separately. So anyway, how do we create an environment and a framework for people to understand this? So I was thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically at the bottom of the pyramid, you worry about whether you can feed yourself, and then at the top of it, it's self-actualization. The peak is being able to do what you want to do without concern in personal safety. So I was looking through this hierarchy of needs and wanting to understand how can we manage people to transition through this process. And it came up with these layers. So starting off with connectivity and devices, if you can't connect to work using a laptop or a phone or a tablet or whatever, then you can't do any. And that is the foundation of this concept of hierarchy of needs. It doesn't matter how clever you are at doing smart things if you can't actually connect to your business. Now, I think by this stage into the pandemic, we've probably just about got all this connectivity and devices sorted out. However, people in rural areas who don't have fast bandwidth may be struggling more. People who have older laptops or who have children at home who are studying, who need those laptops, people are being pushed onto older devices and tablets and things like that. So you have to worry about that first level of connectivity. After that, we're based on building out suitable rituals and teams. Now, what do I mean by suitable? We're going to change the way we meet. First of all, you're not going to say hello to people as you go through the office or stop in to pick up a cup of coffee in the kitchen. You are going to be doing that through something like a Slack or something else where you can drop in and say hi in a channel. That's a good thing to do, by the way. Top tip. Create a channel for people to say hello to each other in the morning. But the way that you work together is going to change. The meetings that you used before are unlikely to be the same as you would use now. Working from home is really important, that you have extended periods without interaction, but you have the possibility of interaction. There's lots of things you can do around that, such as keeping one meeting room permanently open. So if somebody wants to go and have a chat, it's like a virtual water cooler experience. On the other hand, bringing everybody together will be shown up as being the extreme waste of time and money that it often is. So look at the way that you change your rituals. Maybe you want to have a Friday evening quick session to wrap up the week for everybody. Maybe you start the week with a meeting. But the old adage, this meeting could have been an email, is now thrust into sharp contrast. So you can definitely change the way that you set these things up, but you can only do that once you've got your connectivity sorted. Now, as we move up, let's say we've got our connectivity laid down, we've got our meetings sorted. The next level up is going to be security and trust. Now, security is something that, of course, IT like to worry about a great deal. And I think it's really important for us to understand that for the vast majority of people, security is incomprehensible. So setting up a VPN for many people is really difficult, so you need to help them through that. On the other hand, you have to worry about, or think about rather, whether the material you're working on really needs that level of security. And that's probably a shocking thing. So all the IT people out there, security people are going, oh my God, what's he saying? But anyway, it's important to get the right level of security for the right level of task. If you're working in a medical area or if you're working in some kind of regulated industry, then security is going to be super important. But if you're just swapping emails and stuff backwards and forwards or work in a design shop or something like that, it's probably not all that important. And so striking the balance between security and usability is really important. Trust between people is even more important, but I'll come back to talk about that in a minute. Now, once we've got that security locked down, that we know what we're doing, we're working there, we can start looking at better ways of doing things. Maybe we find that we didn't need that meeting, maybe we need an extra meeting. It's interesting to look at how we can perform better and look at much more effective ways of performing our jobs. But we can only do that once we got the rest of it sorted out. But it's a great opportunity to sit back, think about how I could be working better because it's different. It may not feel normal, and that's a chance for us to explore options and improve ourselves. A large part of that is self-service. Now, self-service is really interesting. What do I mean by that? I mean, customers can no longer come into your shop, for example, or if you're a business, you can no longer wander over to HR and say, I'd like to book this Friday off on vacation. you have to do it through some kind of online service. Lots of things may not be available to you, and it's really important to track what services are self-service within your building. Now, I would include in that the ability to create new forms of software. And that's a really important ability. It's extend the capability of delivering services beyond a core group of IT, about enabling people to be able to support their activities, their customers, and deliver a self-service environment that is richer than the one you currently have. Really important to be able to look at that and to understand what is the full possibility, what is the reach of digital in self-service there. And up at the top, self-care. Now, self-care is something that you can only do if you've got all the other things in place. There's a lot of people who are struggling. There's a lot of people with cabin fever. There's people who are suffering from loneliness. There's people who don't understand how to get their computer to work and they're too embarrassed to say it. Similarly, there's a lot of people who are embarrassed to talk about the fact that they're feeling depressed because they haven't been out of their apartment for the last week or whatever it happens to be. And you need to put in place some tools there to help people solve that. It's really important for managers to be looking after their team. More important than ever, you need to check in on people and identify the vulnerable ones. And this is where something like self-service can come in. And you can create a survey, for example, that you can push out to staff saying, have you got all the stuff you need? Are you struggling? Don't use those kind of words though. So you can create surveys that will find out how people are performing, how comfortable they are working from home, and things that you as a manager or business can do to improve their conditions. So it's really important, as I say, to think of these things as a stack and work through them. This provides a framework for prioritizing any decisions. And it's probably quite important for businesses to think about investment at this point as well. So that's part of the restart and prosper mechanism. Concept is that you might want to pay for people to have big screens. I happen to have a 39-inch monitor in front of me here, and it's fantastic because I work from home all the time. You might consider investing in that because it's a lot cheaper to get people working faster by buying kit than it is them wasting their time. So moving on, I thought it'd be interesting to look at a bit of research that only came out last week, the 10th of April. So this is really fresh. University of Chicago looked in and see what jobs could plausibly be done at home. And the figures are really quite fascinating. So 37% of all jobs in the USA could presumably, plausibly be done from home. 37% of them. And if we look at the major metro areas, that rises to 50% of all jobs. So now that you've sent everybody to work from home, that is going to create a major change going forward. So it's really important to think about the permanence of those things. So it is worth investing in big screens. It is worth investing in better broadband, both as an employee and as a company. So that's really very interesting information. I haven't dug into the research, but the link's there on the screen. And it's really just demonstrates how we have changed dramatically and how the office is a structure that exists because of old ways of doing things. Talking of old ways of doing things, it's going to be very important to move forward and adopt things and change the way that procurement happens. Now, IT has a tendency to say, no, you can't use that, shut down that service. No, that's not an approved thing. Now, all the IT people on here, you know that's true. So we need to relax and ensure that people can experiment and adopt some of these tools. This is just a small selection of all the amazing things that you can just sign up for free or pay a small amount of money on your credit card to use. I mean, obviously the communications one top left, they're all familiar. File sharing like Box or Dropbox, they're quite familiar as well, but there's lots of other things popping up. Some really very interesting tools out there to enable people working together. So for example, Miro allows you to do whiteboarding, as does Limu and a couple of others. Trello has been around for quite a while. It's great for organizing information, but there's so many different things out there that enable us to work more efficiently, and people will experiment with them. And it's really important to look at the use of these tools in the sense of business value rather than worrying about whether they're corporate deals or whatever. Consumerization is going to be part of this permanent change. Consumerization of IT really started with the arrival of people having better laptops and better mobile phones at home. And now they're going to have better software because they've got the time to look at it. They may not be able to access corporate resources. So again, really interesting to explore all of these different tools that you can use and explore the creation of new tools yourselves. But I'll come back to that in a minute. But it's really important to be thinking about human as well. Those tools are designed to help people behave like humans towards each other. And this is all founded on trust. Now, unfortunately, trust has been severely eroded in modern industry. And I thought this was captured perfectly by this recent New Yorker cartoon with the boss sitting there with the row of screens showing people working. Now, there's been a huge explosion of packages out there that monitor activity. So things that take screenshots, things that take pictures every 10 minutes of the person sitting at the computer. These are massively intrusive, and it just demonstrates that there is no proper trust between people in some organizations. So we need to fix that. We need to come back and change it so that there is other ways of doing business, and so that we reestablish that trust. And one of those major things is understanding how we manage the output. How do we assess output? So let's move on to digital transformation. The digital transformation is something that has been around for a long time as a name, but a lot of people spend a lot of money on vanity projects. A lot of things have been driven by the non-business priorities, and as you can see in the figures here, the Wall Street Journal found that 70% of initiatives did not reach their goals. That's higher than even the normal software failure levels. So that is a really high figure, and it's really quite strange that people continue looking at it without having a deep understanding of it. On the other hand, there are people who are in this situation, captured wonderfully by Tom Fishburne and Mark Cartoonist as usual, that are saying digital transformation doesn't apply to me. But suddenly, everybody has to be digital. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is about self-service. You have to be able to deliver to clients digitally. Now, how does that apply to a certain industry? Well, I'm very lucky because I'm surrounded by a lot of artisan bakers, and those artisan bakers and coffee shops are switching to delivery services. So this is a cake that I got for my wife's birthday during lockdown, delivered to the door by the artisan bake shop. I get bread and eggs delivered to my house. I had a large delivery of cakes today. In the bottom right is an exercise class that I go to. This is one of our coaches delivering the class from home. These people had to reinvent their business models more or less overnight in order to survive. Now, the interesting thing is those are small, nimble businesses. Large businesses have to do the same thing. Large businesses have to pay attention to what's happening here. It's really important that we understand that it's not just these small guys. You need to take the opportunity to rethink how to engage with your customers, how to re-engage with your staff, because you can't get them all in a room. And that is not going to go anytime soon. So be like these bakers. Think about how you can change and survive. And that's, again, part of this survive, restart, and prosper. So while these guys are delivering this just now, they still have their shops. Those shops are going to reopen, but they're going to keep on that delivery service, and that's going to grow. They've already taken on extra bakers in both of these bake shops. So a really interesting way of looking at it. Now, how do we do that digital transformation without it taking forever? Well, there are a whole slew of very cool tools out there, such as Alpha Software's Transform product, which enables non-specialists to create applications very quickly. And this is an extremely relevant application that was built in just over a week in collaboration between Alpha and a well-known doctor in the space. And in just over a week, they were able to create a solid, reliable tool that helps people not self-diagnose, but to check. This is not medical advice, but it's to see whether you're at risk or not. And it's a questionnaire, and the questions vary depending on who you are and what happens. And it was very easy to put this together, deploy it, and it scales. And you can have a look at that at mycovid19risk.com, and I'd recommend you do that. I went through and established that I have no symptoms, but I am at risk because I have mild asthma. And it's a great piece of work, and it's very simple to use, and it was put together, as I say, just over a week, and can scale. This is not just talking about a small tool that lets you build things that one or two people can use. This is a delivery of applications at scale. Schlumberger, large company delivering power and oil solutions, created an app using low-code tools as well for their internal staff that just provides information. It's not an interactive thing. It lets them look and see what's happening, best practices, stuff like that. And it has gone from being just something that somebody put together in a day through to being the highest use application on the Schlumberger network. And they were originally planning to put in piles of digital signage and stuff like that. They've scrapped all that, scrapped all their print plans, and they are running specifically just in the application. So low-code tools let you move really quickly. It's also really interesting to look at some of the more interesting ways of dealing with software. So this is a thing that an agency called We Are Social came up. It's a Snapchat lens that you can drop in, and it shows if you're a safe distance away from the nearest person. And you just point it at the person, it comes up and tells you that you're too close or it's safe. And that's just a lovely piece of alternative thinking that was in response to United Nations call for systems. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the alpha software options you have for people looking at building interesting applications in the COVID space later. But they are a leading proponent of low code. I've been working with alpha for a long time. So it's a tool that is designed to help people deliver things without having to be software experts, because they're the subject matter expert. And just as you can build a spreadsheet, most people can build a spreadsheet, and then there's millions of those spreadsheets out there. This is an opportunity to flip that into an application which you can deploy out to a wider number of people more easily and support it more easily. Similarly, if you're in IT, microservices are hugely important at this opportunity, because we're going to have to reconfigure the way the business works. That's part of that self-service layer, the digital provisioning of services to people. That's really important as we go forward. So breaking your services up into chunks, don't have to be too complicated, don't have to be too many of them, but the ability to open up interfaces is going to be hugely important as we establish what it is that we need to restart, what it is that we need to prosper. It's going to be different from what we do today. There's no doubt about that, but it's an opportunity to reflect on that. API is hugely important as well. I mean, APIs enabling things to plug stuff together. So if you're working with partners, you may not be able to communicate with them in the way you've previously done it. So the use of APIs is a great way of building things out. And of course, putting stuff into the cloud just means you can scale up. So I go back to the Alpha COVID application that's out there. No idea how many people were going to use it, but because it's cloud native, it can scale linearly and you don't have to worry about all these things. It's about speed. It's about being nimble. It's not about saying, no, we can't do that. It's about finding ways of doing it. And finally, the more technically aware, I think containers is a really important thing to be looking at, because it enables you to have that nimble approach. It enables you to move stuff around very quickly and build interfaces without too much complexity. So you can take what you've got, reconfigure it as and when you need to, and you will need to. So let's have a quick look at some actions from these sections. So you need to think about survival on the basis of reviewing your business models. How do you change your business models? So I've been working with a company that provides some tools that drive training companies who have all flipped from classroom into delivery online. And you need to change your business model, you need to change the tools. And part of that is prioritizing the key digital services. Think about what those new business models are and then create digital services. The bakeries are using some of the amazing new things that you can basically just click on a website and build things. Some people more complicated, and that needs new tools. So we're going to start building some adopting new tools in the business. Now, whether those new tools are things like Monday for planning or Trello for running Kanban boards or whatever it happens to be, or adopting Alpha Transform or Alpha Anywhere for software development, those new tools are really important. And again, we have to stand back and not say as IT, oh, you can't do that. You have to stand up and say, this is how we can make it work. We will find ways of working. So it's important to be agile, if not agile with capital A. So the business needs to be agile, the services need to be agile. We're in special conditions. We need to think about how can we operate in a different way. And finally, we do have to be aware of security issues. The level of scams and attacks is up. There's some companies I've seen are getting a vast increase of email attacks, phishing attacks, and people are looking at things like the PPP schemes in all the different countries and coming in trying to scam people on that. But we should not be driven by security. We should be driven by ensuring that our staff are effective and our business models are open, and then figure out how to put the security in there that's appropriate. Whether that's locked up tight or whether it's relatively lax really depends on what you're doing and what the vulnerability is. But as I say, you need to think about how do we be flexible, nimble, limber in this environment without being over restrictive. Now, one area which is very close to my heart and is, as I said earlier, is one of the things that triggered the sort of mass awareness of what was coming were events. So why do we attend events, or indeed, why did we attend events? Because the question is, are we ever going to go back to them? But that's a subject for another day. So I wanted to have a look and see, what is an event for? We might go to an event to learn, so we can listen to conference sessions. We might go there to discover new products, walk around a trade show, look at them. We might go there to make a final decision about what we're going to buy. More likely, we're going there to meet people, because events often exist simply because they bring people together. So everybody from the industry comes into the same place and they're all working together in that same environment. So it saves everybody flying to each other. They can meet in one place. Quite often, especially large companies, go to events because their executives are going to be there and they can sign major contracts. But a lot of the emphasis of an event is on schmoozing, if we're honest. There is a degree of serendipity. People will bump into each other at these events, and that typically falls into the sort of learning, discovering, and deciding section of this, although some of it will admittedly happen in schmoozing. So I think this is an amazing opportunity for us to reinvent virtual equivalents for all of these things. So let's say video webinar like this. You would have been joining a webinar with me, whether it was whether we could have done a physical one or not. We would have been doing this virtually. It's very easy for us to do this. Learning works incredibly well. If we look at higher education, many institutions have moved to delivering their lectures by video and then using the time that had been lecture time by engaging with face-to-face discussion. It's a very effective way of increasing interaction rather than decreasing it. It also increases reach enormously, because if you have a virtual event and record it, then many more people can see it than they would do if they were limiting it to people sitting in the room. And recording physical events is much more difficult than it is recording these. It's expensive. Discovering products, well, I think we can do a lot better. There's a lot of very good websites out there, but there's also a lot of very bad websites out there that don't really give us the product information. I think we can all, as product people, do a better job of describing products, and that we can actually replace a lot of that physical discovery process with better web experiences. And similarly, for decision making, we should be able to come up with better decision support tools that help people in procurement or just deciding what they want to buy. Product comparisons, again, there's some good websites out there with that. We just need to extend that model and move away from talking about going to a show to pick things, because very often that doesn't actually happen. And of course, meetings can be done by video conference, and there's going to be a huge rise in e-signatures. They've been around for years, and now we have a compelling reason to use them. We don't actually have to sign physical documents anymore, scan them, and then email them around as we do. We can actually use a lot of these e-signature solutions. We just have to adopt them. And frankly, if the only reason you're going to an event is so that you can schmooze and drink beer with your mates, then I'm not signing it off. And I think that that would be echoed by every CFO in the business. So what's missing from all of that, apart from the schmoozing? Well, frankly, it's buzz. A lot of these equivalents don't have that buzz. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity to disrupt the events market. And there's people out there looking at this. How do we create that serendipitous bumping into people? How do we create that collaboration effect of putting people together in workshops and making it easier for them to interact? I think we have all the technology available. We have the opportunity available. We have a lot of cool things to do. So I really encourage everybody to think about how to disrupt that industry. It's time to do better. So here's some more concrete actions to work through. Move static parts of any decision that you're looking to video. Offer better product information online. If you're still putting things into PDF files and uploading them, then that probably needs to change so they become more searchable, more comparable tools. Make it easier for people to make honest comparisons between products. Discussions can, of course, move to video conferencing. That's probably already taken. Digital signatures, whole bunch of products out there. Built into existing tools like PDF viewers. Those are things that people just need to adopt and use. There's nothing particularly complicated about that. But I do think that we need to start exploring the use of new products and developing new concepts about how can we make events more exciting. And finally, of course, as somebody running an event or designing an event, don't be boring, make it exciting, make it different. Engage tools, make it part of enjoyable experience. If we look at theme parks, for example, you may have to queue for 40 minutes or longer to get onto a ride in a good theme park. However, they ensure that that experience of waiting is not purely dull. Once you get closer, you get into pre-show areas and there's entertainment to keep you engaged and get you excited before it starts. Or you could think about warm-up acts and conferences and concerts. So maybe we should be looking at how do we make these events online not so meeting-like, shall we say? How do we create something more exciting than the lobby you were waiting in before we got started on this? How do we make that dynamic exciting? So there's something I hope I've sparked some ideas about how we can do that with you, and maybe somebody's going to rush off and create a company to deliver that. I sure hope so. So I'm going to come into the last section and talk about how do we manage with people. People are really important. They're not resources. You'll notice I don't use that. They're not fungible assets. They're people. They've got families. They've got loved ones. They've got children. They've got parents. They're just like us, in other words. So today we're in a bad place where we're looking at layoffs, furloughs, and pay cuts. For a lot of people, I think the word furlough had never been heard of until comparatively recently. So this is part of the survive element. And it's actually a very interesting time to look at the companies that care about their staff or the people who just ditch them at the first opportunity. And this is a key element of employer branding. Now, what on earth is employer branding? If you've not come across it before, it's the key to hiring the people you need. As we come out of this, we're going to need to hire people. And that's going to be a restriction on ramping back up as that part of that restart process. So if you treated your staff badly, that will get round through services like Glassdoor and others, but word of mouth, and it's going to be harder to bring people back in or attract new people. So it's really important for us to think about looking after people properly. And of course, let's hope that not too many of our friends and colleagues have actually contracted COVID-19, because it's really not an entertaining experience. So how do we do this? How do we keep people engaged? So furloughed people are already disengaged because they've been furloughed, but you need to actually keep them warm. Just like an athlete is getting ready for a race, we need to be ready for that restart point. How do we ensure that the staff can kick back in? And there's an interesting comparison with people who've been on maternity leave, or paternity leave, so that people coming back from those leaves should be able to pick their jobs up immediately, but very often have ended up disconnected from the work they've been doing. So how do we do this? And this is super important. Communicate, push information out to people, make sure that there is informal over communication going on. And I'm not talking about that kind of stiff formal communication that corporate comms and senior HR people and chief execs love pushing out there. I'm talking about being human to your colleagues, being human to the people you're working with. That's super important. Provide support for those people. So they may not be able to connect their computer up. They may not be able to get their VPN working, but more importantly, some of them may be suffering from mental health issues. Provide that support, self-care aspect. Help people educate, because we might actually need people with different skills when they come back on. So we may not bring everybody who's been furloughed back on, but we can certainly help the people that we have furloughed to learn new skills while they're out there. So we have to be preparing for that ramp. We have to prepare for that restart. It's really important for us to be able to pick that up. So a couple of examples. There's a company called 5app that creates this very joyous experience of, it's called the Digital Hub. It enables you to push out messages, and there's a couple of companies out there. One of those training ones I mentioned earlier is using this to communicate with staff. They flipped their entire business from classroom-based training into virtual training in about a week. And the CEO and other senior staff record videos from home just on their phone and push them up there. And unlike a more rigid approach to communication, this thing it's kind of like using YouTube. It's very easy to find stuff. It's easy to consume them. It's kind of bright and colorful, and it's a nice experience. But it's the way that it's used that is super important. Communicate with people, keep them engaged, keep them informed, help people through this process. Employee surveys, I mentioned them earlier. Creating employee surveys is something that is traditionally relatively difficult, and there's tools that are disconnected. So something like Alpha Software Anywhere, again, can be used to create tools to go and ask how people are doing. Do they need anything? And you can track the trends. You can integrate that data into an analytics package, and you can see where people are on their journey through those levels of hierarchy. Now, some concrete actions again. You should be planning for restart. You should not just be thinking about how do we cut costs. We want to be ready to scale up rapidly. And that means that we have to keep our furloughed staff warm so that when we bring them back on board, they are potentially retrained. They are warm, just like those athletes, ready to run the race, even though they've been waiting for it to start. And it's an opportunity to start thinking about, do we have our teams organized properly? How are we going to bring those teams back? Maybe we can change the way that they look. Maybe we're going to have to find new talent. Maybe for digital transformation, we need some new business models. Maybe we're going to need different people there. So we need a good employer brand there, and we need to be able to attract the people with the right skills. And of course, we must help the people left behind. It's not their fault that they're being laid off. So if we do have to get rid of some people, then we should be doing whatever we can to keep them engaged in society and ideally with the company. Because again, employer brand, company brand, if somebody really doesn't like your brand, they're going to badmouth you. But on the other hand, if you've been super supportive with people, that gets around, that positive message comes out, and that is converted into the bottom line. It's important to be positive through this time and build resilience. Now, I'm going to have another quote that turns out to actually not be true. Winston Churchill is often credited with saying, never waste a good crisis. It turns out this is not a quote from him at all. Nobody actually knows where it came from. But the principle is very good. So while we are thinking survive, restart, and prosper, we really need to be putting in place the mechanisms that's going to enable us to do that. So we need to be learning, discovering, and inventing. I was listening to an interesting interview today with another entrepreneur, and she was saying this is a major opportunity to discover new things, to find new ways to do stuff. And I'm complete agreement with her on that one. So a few final actions before we come into some other thoughts for the end. So be ready to accelerate out of this current downturn. Be ready to grow and be prosperous. So how are we going to do that? Many of these changes are going to be permanent. We need to figure out which of those changes are permanent. Remember, 50% of Metro employees in the USA are going to be able to work from home forever. So we need to figure out what they need, whether that's the right thing to do, and not just learn what has changed, but why and how, and think about it. We need to keep people engaged. We need to help them along this difficult path. Digital is always the way to go. If you think, oh, let's hire in another 50 people and set up a call center, you're thinking the wrong way. You should be thinking digital. We need to build surge capacity. We've had decades of lean cuts in places, cutting everything back to the minimum. This doesn't give us resilience, this gives us problems. So we need to think in terms of surge capacity. And in the days of cloud computing, that is not a difficult thing to be thinking about. And we really have to be ready for more crises. Not only are there plenty more COVIDs out there, coronaviruses, there are hundreds of zootropic diseases out there. There is climate change coming along that is changing everything. So once we get out this way, we have to respond to that. And one of the things that I think is absolutely super is that this crisis is showing good character. So Alpha is offering free software for developers building anything related to COVID-19. That's on the website. So Alpha Software will give you a free license for Transformer Anywhere if you are building things that are helping here. That is a tremendous contribution to the whole ability to have a digital response to a terrible crisis. Sofid, which is an ID company, does SSO software. They're offering it completely free to people who are wanting to put in place SSO solutions to address remote workers. 5app, the people I was talking about earlier who do the communications, they've extended their trial period, lets you set up the digital hub and run it through the crisis. Cornerstone, which is a training company, has just opened up a complete free hub. And the Analyst Syndicate, which I'm a member of, is preparing what we call the Restart and Prosper package. You can guess who's been working on that one, where we are looking to put together a small package to help people move through this. But it's really important that we come up with ways of becoming more resilient and more agile, because this is not the last crisis. This millennium has already seen the financial crisis, it's seen SARS and various others. There are going to be more coming, and we need to learn from this, and we need to be able to respond and build a new and better world. So I hope that was interesting. I can hand back to you, David, and see if there are any questions.
Richard, thank you very much. That was really fantastic. No questions have come in yet, but by all means, if you do have any follow-up questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Now, we decided to move our conference virtually before COVID for other reasons. So it kind of looked like we were forward thinking on that, but we actually weren't. However, we did have complaints about, part of what I miss about in-person conferences and events is that we do have those meetings, we do have those breakout sessions. So I imagine that needs to be sort of a new way of imagining things, of putting together. I think you had an idea of having, for example, an open conference room where people could just show up during the day, and if there's someone else there, they can chat, kind of like a water cooler. I suspect we need to build out other things like that for events where you do have those meetings that are sometimes, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 people who happen to be interested in a particular topic, and maybe you have 10 of those going on at the same time, and then maybe they come back to see a session or something like that. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts about that. We'll be doing that.
It's also worth mentioning that Zoom has the ability to create breakout rooms, which is not a well-known feature. It was actually designed for education, so that if you've got a classroom of pupils or students, you can separate out the different groups working together into their own separate Zoom groups. But it would actually work very nicely for what you've just described. And yes, that idea of being able to bump into each other and go and visit is enormously important. I mean, it's events, virtual events have been going on for a while. I mean, there was a fad about building 3D environments you could walk through and all sorts of stuff.
I remember that,
like that. Yeah, that didn't work out so well.
No,
but the technology wasn't super important at the time. And frankly, don't really need it. But yes, it's that human interaction. The other thing that was really interesting at Mobile World Congress was that they dealt with the ability to do kind of birds of the feather thing. So you could put in what you were interested in learning about, and it would kind of match you up. But that was an enormous 100,000 person attendee event where it was almost impossible to actually find any good matches. But for smaller events, the idea of actually having a birds of a feather toolkit that you get out there before the event becomes really important. Quite a lot of events have been trying to move. I mean, I'm not talking about individual company events, but I'm talking more about the events that are run by conference companies have been trying to turn into 365-day things, and they bring people together beforehand and try and set up those meetings. Nobody has cracked that yet, but I think this is going to be a massive impetus for it. It's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out.
Great, thanks very much. Well, if there are no further questions, I guess it's time for us to break. Thank you very much for presenting today. This is absolutely fantastic. For those of you listening, there will be a recording of today's session, so you can go watch it on replay. And Richard, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for their time listening. Hope this is useful for you.
Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.